Another provision that they wrote into this Constitution, this document that had 7 articles, was that you were going to have ratification by the various state legislatures. Now, one guess how many states were required to ratify the Constitution for it to be a go? 9. The number was 9. They loved the number 9. So you had to have 9 states, state legislatures, vote to adopt these articles of this Constitution. Sorry. So there quickly arose 2 camps. One of them were called the Anti-Federalists. Federalism was this concept that you need to have a strong central government, and most of the proponents for ratifying this Constitution that they had worked so hard on were called Federalists. A series of letters, articles basically, were written and published in newspapers around the United States. And these were called the Federalist Papers. I have you reviewing one of them for your discussion board. So this was a series of essays written by 3 people: Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. Now, if you have seen the play Hamilton, they really stressed that most of them were written by Alexander Hamilton. But in this book, they discuss James Madison. The Federalist paper that you'll be reviewing is one that was written by James Madison. The third person was a guy named John Jay. And John Jay, I think, wrote 4 or 5 of them. So they laid out this case for what this would look like and why people needed to ratify it. Meanwhile, they are getting a lot of pushback from various people. Thomas Jefferson was one of the people from across that was far away, but was going, hey, you need to be paying attention to the states. You don't need to take all this power away from states. You don't need to take all this power away from people. There is nothing in this document, was one of the arguments. There's nothing in this document that shows that states are protected or that people are protected from this government. So they also wrote essays. Now, one of the problems with the Anti-Federalists was that they did not have a unified message. So some people didn't like the Constitution because it didn't give enough rights to states. Some of them didn't like it because it didn't have a list of things like their state constitutions did that the government couldn't do. Like this list of rights for people. So they were kind of all over the place. And Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay had better, more organized arguments. But they ran into a lot of trouble. As they were trying to figure out what this was going to look like. Y'all remember at the beginning we were talking about Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams, by this time, was in the Massachusetts legislature. And when it came time for them to vote in Massachusetts for ratification, they weren't able to convene their ratification convention because the governor, who was supposed to reside, mysteriously came down with an illness. Said he had gout. So they just weren't meeting. They weren't meeting. Some representatives actually went to Massachusetts, and the question was, what can we do? How can we help him get better? And in really in kind of in secrecy, some negotiations happened that Samuel Adams was involved in, and what he argued was this thing needs a bill of rights. It needs a list of rights of people. And so in the negotiations, the promise was made that as soon as the Constitution was ratified, and if a new government was put in place, they would immediately issue a Bill of Rights to be ratified. So once this agreement was made, all of a sudden the governor is better. All of a sudden Massachusetts gets together and they voted to ratify. Then they started kind of falling. What was the last state to ratify the Constitution? You guessed it, Rhode Island. Oh, by the way, Rhode Island didn't send any representatives to the Constitutional Convention. They had to actually threaten, and you will see, you can see in some of the Federalist Papers, they're like, well, if Rhode Island doesn't get on board, then Rhode Island can just go off and be by themselves. And they did not. The 9 states had voted. They had actually already formed the new government. And then Rhode Island finally, because they were threatened that they weren't going to let them be a part of the Union if they wouldn't ratify the Constitution, they finally ratified it. And I mean, it only passed by like 2 votes in Rhode Island. So what did they come up with? This is what they needed. They needed a government that was strong enough to meet the country's needs. They were going to have a national army, yes. They needed to have a government that could operate and have power, enough power to get things done, but would not have so much power that it interfered with state governments. Because these state governments now had been operating for decades, and they did not want to have a dismantling of their state power. They wanted to have a government that would not threaten liberty, and they needed to have a government that was based on popular consent. So one of the things that they did was said that in each state, the people got to decide who the members of the House of Representatives would be. Structure of the Constitution. So we're not so much talking about content yet, but let's look at the structure. They had a short preamble. It said, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." I got through the whole thing without bursting into song, because y'all know this is a schoolhouse rock. We the people. Oh well. All right. So 7 articles. Article 1 talks about the legislative branch. That is where we're going to have a House of Representatives, and where there will be a Senate. The members of the House of Representatives will be chosen by the people. The members of the Senate will be appointed by state legislatures. So that was the original Constitution. And they put down that the members of the House of Representatives will choose their speaker and other officers, and that the House of Representatives will have the sole power of impeachment. The members of the House of Representatives serve 2-year terms. The members of the Senate did and still do serve 6-year terms. The Vice President will preside over the Senate. So this is Article 1. Article 1 talks all about Congress, what Congress will be composed of, how they will be elected, and what powers they have. So let's talk about Article 2. They decided in Article 2 that they would show not an executive committee, but a president. One, executive power of the United States will be vested in the president. The president was not going to be voted on by the people. The president was not going to be appointed by state legislatures. The president was going to be appointed by or voted on by electors. They formed something called the Electoral College. It's a little complicated, but basically the members of the House of Representatives plus 2 senators that each state has determines how many electors they have. The electors did and still do vote for the president in December. And so what are we doing in November if the electors actually vote for the president? Well, since Andrew Jackson was in office, he encouraged people to vote and then give directives to their electors. So that's what we do. We tell the electors who we want them to vote for, and they have free will to go and vote for whoever they want to, but usually there are procedures in place to make sure that the electors vote for the person that got the popular vote in each of the states. Some states even charge you a fine if you vote for somebody different. So that's the way that they work that out. Notice Article 1 is very long. Article 2, in comparison, is much shorter, only 4 sections. And then there's Article 3 that has 3 sections. Article 3 provides for the judicial branch. So I said before that they set it up with a completely separate entity to settle disputes. So they said there's going to be a Supreme Court, and then Congress got to decide if there were going to be lower courts, if it was necessary, and they would have judicial power, and then it outlines some types of cases that they will hear, that the Supreme Court and any courts that are formed will hear. And then it has a provision about treason. Article 4 talks about the relationship between states. So just like in the Articles of Confederation, there's the full faith and credit clause. They also have a privileges and immunities clause. You can't discriminate against people just because they're not from your state. They have a fugitive clause. And, I missed something, but it's okay. They talk about how new states will be admitted. So this is some directives. These are some things that states have to do. Article 6 says that the federal government is going to be supreme. If you look at this second provision, it says the United States Constitution is going to be the supreme law of the land. So it basically sets up a structure so that we don't have these huge conflicts. If there is a decision, then federal law is going to be supreme. And then Article 7 talks about the ratification process. So once the Constitution was ratified, that was kind of the end of that provision, but it talks about who the representatives were and what was going to be required. Once 9 states had ratified the Constitution, they got together. They actually met for Congress. They told states that they could not coin money anymore, so there was no more state money. There was only United States money, and they started working out how the Treasury was going to work. Soon after that, they developed, just like they promised to Samuel Adams, they developed the Bill of Rights. 12 amendments were proposed, if I'm not mistaken, by Madison again. 10 of them were ratified. So the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution are called the Bill of Rights, the list of rights of the people, and then the 10th Amendment is about states' rights. So they put those out, and while Rhode Island was still trying to decide if they were going to ratify the original Constitution, states had already started ratifying the Bill of Rights. So it was done pretty quickly after the Constitution was amended and the new government was formed. Now, who was the first president of the United States? It was a guy named George Washington. That was who the electors appointed, and then appointed again for a second term. In their minds, everybody was going to be like George Washington, a statesman that was really concerned about his reputation, concerned about the reputation of the United States, had a lot of integrity. This was who they envisioned and what they envisioned.